Okay, we've got a good group here. So I'm sure we'll have a couple of other people joining us, but we'll get started. I want to be really respectful of your time. My name is Kelli Rodriguez, and I am the Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs at Seattle University School of Law. Really excited to have one of our alums joining us today. We're going to chat about AI and compliance and how the two are working together, maybe more importantly now than ever. Um, I have my information here. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have questions that come up after. But feel free to answer, or excuse me, ask questions throughout. We will have, I'll be monitoring the chat. There's also a Q&A function. So if you are interested in asking a question, go ahead and drop it in the chat, and then we will find a good place to answer that. And let's go ahead and get started. I would love to welcome Melanie Myjak. She is an alum of the law school, and I could not even possibly do justice to your career. So, Melanie, if you could give us a brief overview and just maybe talk about kind of where you have come in the industry and sort of what you're seeing as AI starts to move forward. We'll get into some of that later stuff later, but go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Good morning or afternoon. Thank you for asking me to participate in this. Yeah. So my professional experience is really in financial services. I started a long time ago in the 90s. But I've worked at very large multi-billion dollar financial institutions down to community banks, local credit unions. Those roles have been in compliance, and has it changed since the 90s? Oh boy, yes, it has. And of course, then I'm originally from Michigan, I landed here in Washington State for a position at a military credit union, and developed the risk management, compliance, audit programs, and of course the ethics programs, part of the compliance program that I designed. And then, of course, now we're into this new frontier. Well, new frontier. AI's been around for a long time. Anything that a computer can do, that's kind of artificial intelligence. But now it is like wildfire, and the technology is at such a rapid pace that we really need to kind of be prepared and to understand what this is, what its implications are, what we can do within our institutions and organizations to wrangle all that craziness in and make sure that we're not misstepping. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today is what we can, as institutions and organizations across industry. Obviously, my experience is in financial services, but the broader kind of context of risk management and compliance, which this program has really outfitted me, in addition to my experience, doing the master's program really kind of, first of all, kind of confirmed what I've kind of been knowing and doing in the
Mhm.
industry, but also really helped kind of put some really good philosophies around what we need to do in our institutions. So,
Yeah.
kind of my background and kind of where we're going to chat about today.
No, that's great. I mean, outside of AI, I think you highlight a little bit that like compliance has been around for a really long time, right? We called it human resources or we called it, IT. And it lived in various buckets. But only in the last like 10 years or so have we kind of looked at compliance as like um, a discipline in itself. And this program, but just generally in the compliance space, they're starting to emerge, kind of theories and frameworks that you'd see in any other discipline, right? So this program definitely kind of provides some of that context and framework that has emerged out of the industry in the last couple of decades.
Yep.
So if you could chat a little bit about how AI is changing compliance and the regulatory environment. So, how has it shifted the conversation around compliance, maybe specifically in financial services in your background?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, well, like I said, it's not kind of new, but the pace at which it's being just is flooding everything. It impacts everything. The regulations are really lagging.
Hmm.
That's the biggest challenge. I think one of the largest challenges in any kind of compliance role is to kind of stay on top of those technological changes and still remain compliant without the regulations actually being able to keep pace with the
Yeah,
technology.
right.
That is huge. And
Hmm.
I think that's really where the discipline of being proactive, again, and across my career, I think traditionally it's been very reactive.
Hmm.
So most institutions, they don't address a problem until they've been cited, possibly by a
Sure.
regulatory body or something like that. So it's much more reactionary, or the consumer, right? The consumers or customers or whatever are hitting some snags, or third parties. But now we really need to be very proactive. And the best way to do that is well, what we have now is existing regulations, kind
Hmm.
of framing those things around, like for instance, the regulatory framework around data and privacy protections.
Hmm.
That's not new. We anticipate obviously it's going to morph into something hopefully a little bit more consumer friendly, and to hold some of these institutions a little bit more accountable for protecting that data and privacy. But those frameworks they do exist today, and
Sure.
so we kind of I don't like to use the term like retrofit, but really build our programs proactively around what we already know, and
Hmm.
kind of thinking about what some of the dangerous slopes we could encounter,
Right. Yeah.
it being much more proactive in that regard. So staying on top
Yeah.
of that. Mhm.
No, it's funny you highlight something that, the law is always going to be slow to catch up to technology, right? That's just, and in some ways it should be that way, right? Like the law, if it tried to get ahead of technology, it wouldn't even know what it's trying to regulate, you know?
Right.
So it's almost by design always going to be behind technology. And so it leaves this gap with, as compliance officials, and professionals, you know what the technology is capable of, you know where the law is and what's already regulated. And then there's this gap of what has yet to be regulated and how should we as an organization regulate ourselves in the absence of the law having caught up, right? So you're
Mhm.
definitely in this position of having to make really ethically sound decisions, right? Based on you as an individual and your moral compass, the community and the organization, and what is normal, what are seen as norms, aligned with their mission and values, those sorts of things. So it's an interesting gap to kind of work in. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, and you bring up the point about the ethical stuff. And again, I've always, anybody that's ever worked with me, I always say ethics is the ground floor. And so I
Mhm.
think that without some kind of framework or directive or guidance from regulatory bodies, I think we just really need to rest upon our ethical kind of principles. And that's why it's really the ground up, right? If you start
Right.
in an ethical place, like protecting consumer data. Okay.
Hmm.
We don't need a regulator telling us we should do that. That's the right thing to do.
Right. Right.
Treating it like it's our own
Yeah.
information. So again, the ethics is really should be the governing kind of framework and principle that we kind of build all of these programs on.
Yeah, for sure. So really good segue. So who, in your view, who owns that ethical oversight? How should we be looking to regulators to step up a little bit more? Should we be looking to the organizations or the individuals within the organizations? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's not just one owner. It is in institutions, it's across the spectrum.
Hmm.
Obviously, you need oversight governance committees, which could be boards or audit or supervisory committees, things like that, risk committees, compliance committees. Those they have a huge role and responsibility for setting the tone, and determining the program kind of guardrails, things like that. But
Hmm.
working with legal within institutions is key, obviously. Compliance, information technology, even, yeah, third parties too. Of course, we rely on third
Sure.
parties to help us deliver compliance
Hmm.
solutions and support. And so again, everybody kind of owns a piece of the
Hmm.
ethical, because if you have one kind of, bad apple, just
Sure.
or somebody that's not involved in the process, they may
Right.
not even be. So it's important to get everybody at the table that's impacted, and all the stakeholders, to ensure that everybody understands the implications, and the
Right.
importance of having these ethical kind of guardrails.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you talking about, at the governance level, right? There are decisions that need to be made. The organization and its leaders need to make decisions for like how is the organization going to operate? And
Mhm.
then maybe a step or two down, having all of those stakeholders, okay, well, how does the leadership's decision impact my area? And then how do we disseminate that out? How do we train the frontline people? Because you can't have everybody in a meeting all the time, right? And how do you make sure, with it's not always bad actors, it's, maybe just somebody, like you said, didn't know, they weren't trained well, or they just didn't realize that this area that they were working in suddenly was going to impact some of these ethical decision-making trees. So,
Yeah.
has there been anything in your kind of work or consultancy where you've seen ethics interact specifically with AI in how an organization was handling a situation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like again, not to beat a dead horse, but the data privacy is a huge
Hmm.
one. And it truly is an ethical position because if you don't protect that data, I mean, that
Right.
says a lot about you as an institution.
Hmm.
So I think that I've seen some scenarios where the ownership is kind of like a hot potato.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
nobody wants to take the accountability. And again, the ethical, that's a fundamental principle is the accountability piece. And that's why it's really important for each stakeholder to understand the culpability, their accountability, what AI using in their line of business or how it impacts the, institution or society at large, depending on,
Right.
their reach. But yeah, there's been some internal conversations, if you will, about those types of like who owns it and who's
Hmm.
accountable. And so I think that's where they can start running a little off course.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because then it kind of just, the blaming and if things go wrong or if things aren't prepared appropriately, you got to have those frameworks in existence before you kind of march forward. And I've seen some finger pointing. So
Sure.
that's just
Yeah.
been my experience.
Well, I mean, you think about how much data we all have vested with and trusted other companies with, right? I've got so much data out there, and we assume that those companies are going to treat that data, like you said, as their own, right? As their own personal data. And sometimes they have every intention of doing that. And then bad actors, hackers or whomever, are able to penetrate the systems and secure the data. And it's unfortunate that without those checks and balances, and this actually kind of like leads to the next slide, so I'm going to go ahead. Without the internal controls, how do we not only protect the breach of that data, but also how do we hold folks accountable once it's happened? Like, where do we start to put things back together? Be curious
Yeah.
if you have any experience there.
Yeah. I mean, I think recent history has shown me lack of preparation is probably one of the biggest things I've
For
seen
sure.
where there is this mad rush kind of thing to get all this AI stuff moving. And, it's the
Hmm.
pace that at which it's moving it's staggering at some points. And if you don't have the framework or even like I've seen instances where they have no policy or procedures
Yeah.
documented. They don't have a risk analysis or a risk appetite regarding AI and the use of
Hmm.
AI. They haven't thought out like what could go wrong and what is our mitigation in the event that something goes wrong. And there's lots of things, as we know, that could go wrong. I mean, from minor to catastrophic. And so I think the lack of even designing that control environment, which
Hmm.
is these program documents, right? These
Right.
program parameters as to like what the expectations are. And part of that is going to be the testing of it. Like lots of testing needs to happen. Model testing,
Hmm.
data accuracy, availability. Again, I think too many people rely on AI and say, well, type something in and it spits it out. No, that must be right. Well, that's not always the case. It still takes a lot of human intervention to kind of wade through all that data and determine if it's accurate data, how it's been used, how it's been even transported in how it's retained. All of those things need to be determined before you even open up the floodgates of introducing AI to your institution. And I think that's one of the main, because it's at the ground floor. If you don't have that structure, then it could be pretty, pretty hairy situation, I'll put
Sure,
it,
yeah.
if you're not
If you
prepared.
had to pick like two of the most important internal controls, um, What would you pick as kind of like the two things that if an organization was like, okay, today we're going to make a change and start to get our heads around this AI stuff, where's the
Yeah.
first couple of places they should start?
Yeah, again, for what I just mentioned, obviously the infrastructure of the actual program and documents and accountability and all the committees set up, all that kind of stuff, committee charters, all that kind of stuff. But particular internal controls is the testing, okay?
Yeah.
Model testing, I can't stress that enough because again, everybody knows garbage in, garbage out.
Hmm.
And then depending on what your industry you're in, and I'll just focus on financial services, if you look at fair lending,
Hmm.
that's huge. If in fact you have a model that's doing some underwriting for a
Sure.
loan and it's not accurate and you could have some significant discriminatory outputs,
Yeah.
disparate impact,
Hmm.
all of those types of things. And so if you're not testing for that and looking for that, then you're bound to kind of let it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the testing and again, um, well, again, there's just so many things like the training of it, just the
Yeah.
basic understanding of AI, what it does, what it can do, how it's used, how it's communicated, how it's shared, how it's
Hmm.
relied upon. All of those things, you have to make sure that you've tested that data to make sure that it's accurate and it's painting the picture that's accurate for your institution.
You bring up a really good point, right? So I just want to kind of like underscore how important it is, right? If you've got regulations, I think your example of the Fair Lending Act is a really good one, right? You've got laws, regulations that um, decide or regulate how loans are provided to citizens, right? Um, to make sure that organizations who are lending are not being discriminatory, are, providing, fair interest rates, like all of those things.
Sure.
And we often think of like, how do we protect our own data in AI? And that's important for sure, right? Like when I interact with an AI client, I want to know that my data that I'm putting in is protected. But what you're highlighting here is that when an organization is using AI to help its own process, right? So now I'm perhaps a mortgage agent for a lending firm and I'm using our internal AI tool to try and help a client that's trying to secure a mortgage, right? If we haven't built that AI tool, and to your point about testing, right? If we haven't built it and created it and trained it in a way that is compliant with these other regulations, that tool might provide me information that I then go and sell a mortgage to a client that is not compliant with the laws, right?
Right. Yep.
Um, so I think we're talking about like, the data protection is like a 360, right? It's on the, what are clients putting in? How are the employees interacting with the tool if it's a homegrown or an internal tool? And then what is the data that we're getting out? So, that's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, as kind of we think about this space, what skills do you think are important for a compliance professional to have in kind of working in this emerging technology space?
Well, first of all, I mean, obviously, understanding the frameworks of risk management compliance are key. I think the AI knowledge is kind of augments because
Hmm.
fundamentally, you got to have an understanding of what is compliance, what is risk management,
Right.
what are these frameworks, how do we design them to do the things we want to do to detect the issues we may have in AI. Okay,
Hmm.
it's not AI before the frameworks and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But again, being very analytical is important. You got to be flexible too, because things are changing at a pace, and you
Hmm.
might get comfortable with something. Well, it might change.
Right. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
so being able to adapt well to those changes and flexibility, and then I think just being tech, kind of trying to be more tech savvy. I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
I tell people I'm not an information technology or security professional. However, I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough
Sure.
that how it impacts or how it interrelates with compliance and risk management programs.
Hmm.
So I think that, those are important to be obviously all the skills that make us good kind of analytical compliance professionals, wanting to kind of dig down to the root cause and find out how things work and how we can make it better and stuff
Right.
like that. But with the AI kind of on top of it, being tech savvy is as tech savvy as possible, and just remaining relevant in the
Hmm.
workspace. And yeah, that's what I've been doing. I just kind of jumped
Yeah.
headlong into the AI piece. A little over a year, well, it's probably about 2 years now that I've been exposed to a bigger AI solution.
Hmm.
But some institutions are just kind of tiptoeing into it, and others are going full blown. I did some consulting last year for a large Chicago bank, and they had their internal AI solution. So
Hmm.
depending on the institution, they might have their own solution as
Yeah.
well, you know.
Right.
And so just to kind of caveat, I might be kind of running out of the question here, but I wanted to
That's all
make
right.
the point
Yeah.
that, yeah, some have internal solutions, and they have some guardrails around that. But I guard against any institution just going and say, "Oh, we're just going to adopt Copilot and then move forward with it,"
Sure.
without any idea of like how are we going to use that? What kind of data
Hmm.
are we going to put in there? What kind of guardrails are we going to put in there? Because again, these models, they're learning models and they're taking
Hmm.
that data and information, and so you want to make sure that you're not putting like obviously non-public information from consumers and things like that in there. But
Right.
sorry,
I mean,
I kind of
no,
diverted
that's okay. I think you're
conversation there.
highlighting, I think you're highlighting some really great points, right? Like, I think one of the things that compliance professionals need to be really adept at doing these days. When we think about compliance, 20, 30 years ago, when I started my career, compliance was a little bit, right? Like I said, it was, human resources or IT, and you kind of sat in your office and you read the rule and then you created a policy and you sent it out. And it was like not totally before email, but like there was a lot of paper, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, here's the new policy, whether it's hiring policy, IT protocol, like whatever, right? You just kind of send it out. And now business is so dynamic, especially in this space where as a compliance professional, you can read the regulations, right? To your point about the Fair Credit Act, right? Or Fair Credit Reporting Act. I
Reporting.
can't
Yeah.
remember. Yeah. But you really do have to leverage yourself and avail yourselves of the subject matter experts in the room, right? I hear a lot of our alums talking about how as a compliance professional, they are the communication hub, right? They hear from the salespeople and the IT people and the marketing folks and the customer service folks. They're getting all of these inputs and they're being charged with having to distill the regulations and read them and keep up with them. And their job is not just to put out the new policy, but really ask all of the questions,
Mhm.
dig into what are we trying to do with a particular product? How is it going to fit? How are they going to use the AI tool and become this kind of information hub? I don't want to say jack of all trades, but to your point, like we're not necessarily the subject matter experts in all of them. And then create a policy that is, to the earlier points, ethical, compliant, meets our employees and our customers where they are, all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And to the point about how the role of compliance professionals has evolved. So I've always in my career, I always have to elbow my way into the room,
Hmm.
because I've always had the philosophy that compliance needs to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Many institutions and organizations don't feel that way. They'll contact compliance when they need a policy or they need a directive on a certain regulation. And like Kelly, you said, you spit out your opinion and then you move on to the next
Hmm.
thing. So, but now it needs a much broader, they really need to be at the table all the time
Right.
because of what's happening in the marketplace in all industries across across
Hmm.
everything. So I think that's a huge role change, and I'm hopeful that the leaders and governance oversight executives of these institutions
Right.
realize the importance of compliance having a seat at the table to kind of wade through these risks and potential pitfalls that many
Hmm.
institutions will inevitably trip down if they don't get some insight from the legal compliance and risk management individuals at their
Yeah. Well, and
institution.
I think even more, well, I shouldn't say more importantly, right? Like it's absolutely important that they invest in having a really strong compliance team, right? And it's so important that organizations recognize that those teams need to be staffed and given the resources to not just put out the fires, right? It's like the whack-a-mole of compliance, right? Where you're like, oh, this regulation, right? Like all of these things. But if they
Mhm.
don't have the bandwidth to really step back and be strategic, then they aren't able to be strategic about that gap we were talking about earlier, where, the regulations only go so far, but the technology is here, and how do we fill that? That's where
Mhm.
you really do need thought partners and thought partners that have the bandwidth and the resources to really be strategic in order to address some of those things.
Absolutely. Agree 100%.
So I'm curious if you could like go back and give yourself some advice, or maybe somebody who's really excited about this space. What advice would you give to somebody looking to build a career in this area?
Yeah, first of all, I am a compliance nerd. I have been for a very long time. I know it's funny. I really get jazzed and excited about it because, well, I like to find out how things are working, make things better. Plus, just understanding like, laws and rules and regulations. I'm a rule follower kind of thing. Not too much of a stickler though. There's got to be
Mhm.
flexibility.
For sure,
That's
yeah.
the thing is, I mean, early in my career, I kind of the older, people before me were real sticklers in my experience, and there wasn't that flexibility. Things change every,
Mhm.
so that's a huge thing, and because
Right.
everything's changing at such a rapid pace, you have to be flexible and kind of go with the flow.
Mhm.
But again, I think focusing on, having a good understanding of like what is compliance.
Mhm.
A lot of people think it's just following rules and regulations. Well, it's not. There's more to that. There's
Right.
there's contracts, right?
Mhm.
There's HR policies, there's ethical policies that we have to do. There's a ton of things that go into compliance and then risk management. So having a really good understanding of what those disciplines are, what their frameworks are, how they help institutions, right? Because again,
Right.
this is a job, it's a sales job. It truly is a sales job because to kind of harken back to what you were mentioning, Kelly, about throwing resources, institutions need to
Right.
throw resources at these disciplines. Um, you're not a profit center, okay? It's
Mhm.
not.
Sure.
It is
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
right? But we have to be able to illustrate our value.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's important. So again, that's where the sales kind of comes in to
Mhm.
believe what you're selling, believe in the philosophy and the whole point and premise of having compliance and risk management programs.
Mhm.
Um, in ethics programs because they do help the institution be more profitable. They help protect employees. Help protect consumers, society at large. I mean, there's lots of benefits to it. So being able to kind of sell yourself in the industry and the profession, I think, is key. But then being open-minded and broad-minded and being able to work across many disciplines. There's a lot of people you're going to be involved with. You're going to be at board committee level that
Mhm.
don't really know what's going on in the institution, so they're at 10,000 feet.
Right.
And then you have individuals you might be training these
Mhm.
concepts and compliance to that are in the thick of it day to day, and they're down in the weeds and in the minutia. And
Right.
so you need to be everywhere in between
Yeah, for sure. For
to be
sure.
able to communicate the
Yeah.
impact and the importance of these programs. So
Yeah. I
and
think
Seattle University School of Law and program again. I can't speak enough about how great it is, Kelly. I'm grateful that I kind of stumbled upon it several years ago
Mhm.
because I think it's really helped bolster my learning throughout my career already
Sure.
and just kind of put me at another level.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I appreciate that. I think one of the things we do really well here, and it's something, it's funny, I haven't really talked about it on a webinar in the last little bit, but I talk about it a lot with prospective students. Our first year, right? So I'm going to go forward because it's got a couple of slides that are helpful here. But our program is structured to be over 2 years, and most students take over 2 years. Most of our students are working professionals. They've been out of undergrad for 10 to 20 years, kind of mid-career. We do have students who are younger. We've got students who are older. It runs the gamut there. But in those 2 years, you're taking about two classes each semester. And that first year, those first 3 semesters are all required courses, which is different than a lot of the other programs out there. Um, in our program, we really believe strongly in building that strong, like you were talking about, a strong framework of compliance. What does it mean to create a compliance program? What does it mean to have risk management? How do they work together? And we spend a lot of time on writing, synthesizing the law, researching the law, writing policies, drafting. What does all that really nitty-gritty work look like? And then in the second year, students have the opportunity to take electives in areas that are interesting to them around compliance. Um, but it's that first year foundation. In the electives, you'll learn about, fair credit reporting and healthcare, or like whatever electives you're taking, you'll learn about the actual law as it is today. But that first year foundation is so important because as our attendees and everybody knows, like the law changes all the time. And I could tell you, our faculty could tell you what the law is today, but what's really important to us is that you have the skills to know how to find out what the law is in 5 years when it changes, in 10 years, in 20 years, because it's going to be really different. So we really emphasize those foundational skills in that first year so that students have the skills to take them into 20 years in their career when the law is going to be fundamentally different than it is right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I definitely want to open up for questions. We did have one question kind of come in over chat. Somebody asked if the slides would be available later. We don't make the slides available, but we do have a recording that will come out in a couple of weeks. It'll be posted online. So if you are interested in receiving the recording, please feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email and everything up again so you can find me directly. Feel free to send me an email at either one of those email addresses. I think it's actually different than the one that was on the first slide. So pardon, they'll all get to me. Don't worry about it. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any now. I don't know if you've got any final thoughts, Melanie, that you might share just kind of as we're wrapping up here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think again, I think I've really kind of just stressed the program that Seattle University offers is because there's other programs I looked into, um, and I agree, Kelly, they do provide a good foundation to where then you can, as things change, you have the skill set to be able to kind of follow those things or research and make sure that you have the right information. But again, just to kind of recap, like just be flexible, go with the
Yeah,
flow.
for
There's
sure.
change is the only thing that's consistent,
Yep,
right? And
totally.
and so yeah, just kind of go with it and relax with it. And it is a very fun career if you want exciting change
Yes,
because it does not stay stagnant. It is
for
not
sure.
stagnant at all.
For sure. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Melanie, for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm super excited to have you with us today. Anyone else, feel free to reach out online or give me a phone call. It's totally fine. And I just really appreciate it. Thanks again, Melanie.
All right. Thank you for the
Yeah,
opportunity. All
thanks
right.
for
Take
being here. Take
care.
care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.